ready to dive into 15 absolute game-changing events that shook the foundation of the Oscars. The Academy Awards have always been about way more than just handing out trophies for a good movie. They function as a massive glittering mirror that reflects the constantly shifting identity of America, exposing our flaws and our triumphs for the whole world to see. For almost 100 years, these little golden men haven't just symbolised a job well done. They have marked deep cultural turning points that go way beyond simple entertainment value. When we dig into the archives of Oscar law, specific nights stick out not just because of the glitz or the shock value, but because they completely flip the script on how we talk about representation and our collective morals. These weren't merely viral clips or water cooler gossip. They were absolute earthquakes in the industry. We are talking about tectonic movements that permanently reshaped the topography of Tinseltown and left nothing the same in their wake. So right now we are diving deep into 15 watershed events that did a lot more than just splash across the morning headlines. They carved their names into history books. We are spanning the spectrum from shattering victories that challenged the nation's racial tension to the jaw-dropping scandals that kept millions of viewers glued to their screens in disbelief. These are the specific slices of Academy Award mythology that outgrew the gala itself to embed themselves permanently into our shared social DNA. A few of these instances shine a light on talent that was ignored for far too long, finally getting the flowers they deserved. Others acted as lightning rods, capturing the volatile controversies of their specific decades. Yet every single one proves the Oscars are both a trophy case for elite talent and a boxing ring for America's identity crisis, showing us exactly who we are and who we think deserves the spotlight. So grab your popcorn and let's unfurl that iconic crimson rug to re-examine the 15 most impactful, heavy-hitting events in the annals of Oscar lore. We are kicking things off with a monumental piece of history that dates back to a completely different era, starting with a shattering glass ceiling moment that occurred during a time when the winner was essentially treated like a second-class citizen by the very people applauding her. To the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, my colleagues in the film business, and all the distinguished guests here tonight, this stands as one of the absolute most joyful experiences of my entire existence. Number 1, Hattie McDaniel becomes the very first Black Oscar recipient back in 1940. It was February 29th, 1940, inside the glitzy Coconut Grove at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, when the status quo was quietly dismantled as Hattie McDaniel snagged the trophy for Best Supporting Actress for playing Mammy in the epic Gone with the Wind. In that precise second, McDaniel didn't just win a statue, she etched her name in stone as the first African-American to ever claim an Academy Award. It was a monumental victory, but what makes it truly staggering is the horrific context of the society she was living in at the time. The bitter irony hanging over that evening was thick enough to cut with a knife. While the industry decided she was talented enough to receive their most prestigious laurel, she still wasn't considered human enough to break bread with her white colleagues. You have to understand that the Ambassador Hotel enforced strict segregation laws, and originally they weren't even going to let McDaniel walk through the front door of the ceremony. It required a massive power move from Gone with the Wind's legendary producer David O. Selznick just to get her into the building. And even after all that fighting, she was barred from sitting at the main table with stars like Vivian Leigh and Clark Gable. Instead of basking in the limelight, she was shoved off to a tiny table for two, tucked away against a distant wall far from the action. When her name was called and she walked up to accept her prize, she delivered a speech that was short, incredibly graceful, and fully aware of the crushing weight of history on her shoulders. She told the room with a slight quiver in her voice that it was truly one of the happiest moments of her life. She expressed her deepest wish to always be a credit to her race and to the industry she loved. But make no mistake, the road to that microphone was paved with incredible hardship. Born the daughter of former slaves in 1893, McDaniel had been fighting battles on multiple fronts for her entire career. White executives would only cast her in stereotypical service roles, yet she was simultaneously getting heat from the NAACP and the black press for agreeing to play those demeaning caricatures. She famously clapped back at her critics by saying, "I would much rather play a maid in a movie than actually be a maid in real life." She shattered a glass ceiling inside a ballroom that literally did not want her there. That heartbreaking contradiction defined not just that night, but her entire legacy. Her win was a double-edged sword, symbolising a step forward while simultaneously highlighting the painful reality of how backward America still was. Even with the industry's top prize on her shelf, the discrimination never stopped for McDaniel. When she passed away in 1952, her last request was to be laid to rest in the Hollywood Cemetery, but she was rejected cold because the graveyard maintained a whites-only policy. For anyone obsessed with the golden age of cinema, McDaniel's trophy stands as a beacon of pioneering grit and a dark reminder of the industry's shameful history. She bequeathed her Oscar plaque to Howard University, but in a mysterious twist, it went missing years later, a fitting metaphor perhaps. It symbolised the fleeting hope of recognition entangled with the strict shackles placed on black brilliance during Hollywood's supposed glory days. While McDaniel made waves with her silent grace in 1940, our next entry features a superstar who weaponised the Academy stage for a loud, calculated political ambush. I am standing here on behalf of Marlon Brando this evening, and he has requested that I share a message with you. He has asked me to inform you that he, with great regret, cannot accept this incredibly generous honour. Number 2. Marlon Brando famously turns down his Oscar 1973. By the time 1973 rolled around, Brando wasn't just an actor, he was a cultural institution. His portrayal of the mob boss Don Vito Corleone in The Godfather had completely revived his career, reminding the entire planet of his unmatched god-tier acting ability. When the presenters called his name for Best Actor at the 45th Academy Awards, the room exploded with thunderous cheers. But those cheers quickly turned to confused murmurs as the audience watched a young Apache activist dressed in full traditional regalia walk up the stairs instead of the movie star. She took the mic and said, "Hello, my name is Sachin Littlefeather. I am here representing Marlon Brando tonight, and he has asked me to tell you all that he very regretfully refuses to accept this award." She stood calm in the centre of the storm, explaining exactly why Brando was ghosting the biggest night in Hollywood, citing the horrific treatment of American Indians across the entire entertainment landscape. It was a scathing indictment of the film industry, the mockery found in television reruns, and most urgently, the brutal reality unfolding right then at the siege of Wounded Knee. The reaction inside the auditorium was instant and chaotic, a jarring mix of supportive applause clashing with a wave of ugly, angry boos from the industry elite. In that single, unscripted minute, Brando completely flipped the script, transforming the Oscars from a night of self-congratulatory backpatting into a high-stakes arena for political protest. This was a historic first. A Hollywood heavyweight was sacrificing his moment in the spotlight not to boost his box office value, but to shine a harsh light on systemic injustice. You have to understand the volatile context here. Brando's protest was directly fueled by the dangerous occupation happening at Wounded Knee, South Dakota. At that very moment, brave members of the American Indian movement were locked in a literal life-or-death standoff against armed federal agents. By drawing a straight line between Hollywood's cowboy and Indian fantasies and real-world oppression, Brando forced the glitterati to confront the blood on the tracks of their industry. For the die-hard fans of classic cinema, this was the moment the illusion cracked, signalling a massive shift in what these awards could actually represent. The old-school studio system, which demanded its stars be pretty plastic and strictly apolitical, was crumbling right before our eyes. It was giving way to a turbulent new era where celebrities realised they had a voice and weren't afraid to use it to disturb the peace for a cause. Naturally, the old guard stars raised in the tradition of smiling and shutting up were absolutely horrified by what they saw as a desecration. John Wayne, the ultimate symbol of the mythologized West, was reportedly so enraged he had to be physically restrained by 6 security men backstage to stop him from attacking Littlefeather. But here is the tea that often gets left out. Littlefeather held a much longer 8-page speech written by Brando, but producers threatened to have her arrested and dragged off if she went over 60 seconds. The The full manifesto, which was eventually printed in the New York Times, was a savage takedown of Hollywood's history, detailing decades of dehumanization of native people on screen. The statuette on the stage might have been solid gold, but the statement made by rejecting it rang much louder. Brando's refusal transcended the glitz of the ceremony, forcing Americans to look in the mirror and face uncomfortable truths about historical amnesia. At the time, plenty of critics and insiders rolled their eyes, dismissing the act as nothing more than inappropriate grandstanding by a difficult actor. However, looking back through the lens of history, Brando's decision has been largely vindicated as a prophetic stance on civil rights. Fast forward to 2022, nearly 50 years later, and the Academy finally ate humble pie, formally apologising to Little Feather and acknowledging her brave stand remains a necessary reminder of respect in 2026. While Brando made waves by walking away from the gold to make his point, our next iconic moment involves a graceful acceptance that was a revolutionary act in its own right, changing the complexion of the Oscars forever. Imagine staring into a void and deciding to build a mountain. That brings us to Sidney Poitier winning Best Actor in 1964. When Sidney Poitier stepped onto the stage at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium on April 13, 1964, to accept the award for Lilies of the Field, it was more than just a career high. It was the sound of a sledgehammer hitting a glass ceiling as he completely shattered one of Hollywood's most stubborn and persistent racial barriers. You have to feel the timeline here. Poitier's win happened just months after Dr. King's legendary "I Have a Dream" speech. Occurring during the absolute boiling point of the civil rights movement, this win transcended cinema to become a massive national milestone. In his impeccably dignified speech, Poitier simply noted, "It has been a long journey to this moment, which was the understatement of the century." That brief sentence masked a mountain of struggle. The 37-year-old had fought his way up from poverty, overcome a lack of education, and navigated systemic racism to reach the summit. There is literally no way to overhype the significance of Poitier taking home that trophy. In an industry that had spent decades boxing black actors into roles as servants, buffoons, or musical sidekicks, Poitier had stubbornly built a career, playing men of intelligence and unshakable moral strength. His Oscar-winning turn as Homer Smith, a travelling handyman helping a group of nuns, was a masterclass in charm. Helping them build a chapel in the dusty Arizona desert, he showcased a remarkable screen presence and a quiet authority that you simply couldn't ignore. For black communities across America, watching Poitier hold that statue wasn't just about an actor getting a prize, it was personal. It was a symbol of what was possible. As critic Wesley Morris later wrote, it felt like a brief, shining moment where every door swung open and the war seemed won. The thunderous standing ovation that greeted his victory was the industry's way of finally bowing down. They were recognising not just his undeniable talent, but the sheer historical weight of the history being made right in front of them. But let's be real, that gold statue came with golden handcuffs. As the only black leading man in the 60s, Poitier carried the crushing burden of representing an entire race alone. He was acutely aware of the trap, later describing his predicament as having to be the kind of Negro that white people liked just to get in the door. Look at the resume: the noble doctor in No Way Out, the principled convict in The Defiant Ones, even the saintly drifter in Lilies of the Field. These roles were surgically crafted to appeal to white suburbia while keeping enough soul to make black audiences proud. It was a standing ovation that finally breached the industry's oldest and thickest wall. Poitier's victory didn't tear the whole house down, but it created a hairline fracture in the foundation of Hollywood's racial exclusion. It wasn't the instant floodgate opener people prayed for. Tragically, we would wait another 38 long years before another black man took that specific prize. Nevertheless, his win set a precedent in stone, proving that excellence could not be denied forever, even in an industry as historically closed off as Hollywood. For the die-hard aficionados of classic cinema, Sidney Poitier's legendary Oscar victory stands as a complex symbol, representing both the glittering promise and the frustrating limitations of Hollywood's clumsy attempts at racial progress. It was a monumental, genuine achievement that starkly highlighted just how astronomically talented a black performer had to be in order to even be considered for the same accolades that were routinely handed out to their white counterparts for significantly less groundbreaking work. However, while some Academy Award moments etch themselves into history through carefully planned recognition, others become immortal for entirely different chaotic reasons, specifically through heart-stopping, shocking errors. As our next unforgettable entry in the Academy archives demonstrates, things can go wrong in the most humiliating way possible. I am sorry. No, there is a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture. Moonlight actually won, and I want to be clear that this is not a joke. This is absolutely not a prank. I'm afraid they read the wrong thing. Number 4, the infamous La La Land and Moonlight fiasco of 2017. The 89th Academy Awards, held on February 26, 2017, delivered what is universally considered the most jaw-dropping, scandalous calamity in the entire history of the Oscars. It was the moment when the musical La La Land was mistakenly crowned Best Picture, basking in the glory for several minutes before the brutal correction was made in favour of the true victor, Moonlight. This cringeworthy error unfolded on live global television as legendary presenters Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway, looking visibly perplexed and hesitant after peeking inside the red envelope, decided to announce La La Land as the night's big winner. The musical's ecstatic producers, along with the entire cast and crew, rushed the stage in a wave of jubilation, hugging and beginning their tearful acceptance speeches. Producer Jordan Horowitz was already deep into his heartfelt remarks when a sudden commotion broke out behind him, with panicked Oscar officials and stagehands swarming the background. Horowitz, suddenly realising the gravity of the disaster occurring in real time, heroically interrupted his own moment of glory to deliver a stunning announcement to the world. There is a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture. He snatched the correct card and held it up to the cameras as irrefutable proof, emphatically adding, "This is not a joke." As the stunned Moonlight team navigated their way to the stage in a daze, a flustered Beatty tried to explain that he had opened the wrong envelope, a duplicate for Best Actress, which read Emma Stone for La La Land, rather than the Best Picture card. While the mix-up was undeniably a spectacular piece of television drama that garnered millions of views, the historical weight of what happened ran so much deeper than just a simple clerical error or a viral blooper. Moonlight, a low-budget, tender masterpiece about a gay black man's journey to adulthood in Miami, stood for everything that the Hollywood establishment had traditionally ignored or sidelined. It prioritised black stories, complex LGBTQ+ narratives, and raw, intimate character studies over the usual glitz and big-budget spectacle. Its ultimate victory over La La Land, which was essentially a nostalgic love letter to Hollywood itself, symbolised a potential seismic shift in what the Academy was finally willing to value and reward. For historians of the silver screen, this dramatic on-stage correction served as the perfect accidental metaphor for the industry's painful struggle to recognise marginalised voices. Almost as if the industry was subconsciously saying we were about to give this award to the safe expected choice before waking up and realising we needed to honour this groundbreaking work instead. The fallout from the blunder was swift, severe and absolutely immediate. PricewaterhouseCoopers, the prestigious accounting firm entrusted with the envelopes for decades, had to issue a profuse, embarrassing apology to save their reputation. Drastic new security procedures were implemented for all future ceremonies to prevent a repeat, but the cultural shockwave was even greater. The phrase "envelope please" would never carry the same innocent anticipation again. The incident instantly entered the pop culture lexicon as the ultimate shorthand for shocking public mistakes, cementing itself as live TV's most jaw-dropping pivot ever. Yet, looking beyond the high-stakes drama and the second-hand embarrassment, this Oscar mistake inadvertently shined a massive spotlight on just how historic Moonlight's win truly was. It became the first LGBTQ+ themed film and the first movie with an all-black cast to ever take home the coveted Best Picture trophy. The chaotic error ensured that what might have been just a quietly significant win became one of the most widely discussed and analysed Oscar outcomes of all time. While Moonlight's triumph represented a massive breakthrough for Black and LGBTQ+ storytelling in Hollywood, our next historic Oscar moment shattered the formidable barriers of language and national origin on the global stage, and the Oscar goes to Parasite. Number 5. Parasite makes history as the first non-English Best Picture winner, 2020. For 92 long years, one unwritten ironclad rule had persisted at the Academy Awards. Real Best Picture winners must speak English. Foreign language films were always welcome to compete in their own segregated lane, the international feature film category, but the night's top prize remained the exclusive gated domain of English language productions. That exclusionary tradition was shattered into pieces on February 9th, 2020. When Bong Joon-ho's masterpiece Parasite rewrote Oscar history. When Hollywood royalty Jane Fonda opened that envelope and read out Parasite as the Best Picture winner, the Dolby Theatre didn't just clap, it absolutely erupted. The sharp, satirical South Korean thriller had already swept up awards for Best International Feature Film, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Director earlier in the night. But this final crowning victory represented a seismic, earth-shaking shift in the Academy's willingness to finally recognise the brilliance of global cinema. As the film's producer, Kwok Sin-ae, took the microphone, she expressed the shock of the moment, saying, "I am speechless. We never imagined this to happen. We are so happy." Behind her, the jubilant cast and crew celebrated with unrestrained, infectious joy, while the A-list audience rose to their feet for a thunderous standing ovation. In a candid moment when the Academy attempted to dim the lights to cut the celebration short, the crowd actually rebelled, chanting "Up, up," demanding that the lights be turned back on so the Parasite team could have every second of their well-deserved moment. The significance of this victory extended far beyond just one single film. For decades, undeniable masterpieces of world cinema had been unfairly relegated to the foreign language category, kept separate from the main event. Think about the absolute titans of filmmaking legends like Federico Fellini, Ingmar Bergman and Akira Kurosawa, men who practically invented modern cinema, yet somehow the Academy snubbed every single one of them when it came to the coveted Best Picture trophy. It took a dark, twisted masterpiece like Parasite to finally smash through that elitist glass ceiling, proving that the Oscar voters were finally ready to wake up and look outside their own backyard. And honestly, if any movie was going to force Hollywood to get over itself, Parasite was the absolute perfect storm to make it happen. It was a razor-sharp, viciously funny satire tearing apart class inequality that didn't just speak to Koreans but hit a nerve with audiences in every corner of the globe. As the brilliant director Bong Joon-ho cheekily pointed out earlier that night while accepting Best International Feature, Americans just needed to get over their fear of reading text on screen. He promised that once you jump over that tiny 1-inch barrier of subtitles, you unlock a treasure trove of incredible storytelling that you've been blindly ignoring. For the die-hard movie buffs who had been screaming about international cinema for decades, seeing Parasite take the crown was a massive, long-overdue "I told you so" moment, proving that genius has no language. This shocking win didn't happen in a vacuum. It went down right as the Academy was scrambling to fix its reputation by diversifying its notoriously exclusive membership list. They had been frantically inviting more global voters to the table, people who could actually recognise a masterpiece even if it wasn't churned out by a major Hollywood studio. For one glorious night, Hollywood was speaking Korean and the entire world was absolutely living for the drama of it all. This wasn't just a win, it was a historic shake-up that hinted the Oscars might finally stop being a local popularity contest and become a legitimate global celebration of film. We still have to wait and see if Parasite was just a lucky fluke or the start of a revolution, but that Best Picture win permanently shattered the mould of what an Oscar-worthy movie looks like. But while Parasite was busy tearing down language barriers, we have to look back at another explosive moment in Oscar history that shook the room to its core. This next segment represents a groundbreaking, tear-soaked shattering of the racial ceiling that had held firm for way too long. We are talking about the stunning Halle Berry and her raw, unforgettable turn in the controversial drama Monsters Ball. Coming in at number 6, we have the night Halle Berry made history by snatching the Best Actress title in 2002. When they read Halle Berry's name for the 74th Academy Awards, you could practically feel the air leave the room. The sheer historical weight of that moment crushed everyone, especially Berry. She was a total wreck as she walked up those stairs, shaking and gasping for air, trying to pull it together before delivering what became the most gut-wrenching speech we've ever seen. Through a flood of tears, she barely managed to whisper that this moment was so much bigger than just her own ego or career. She dedicated that golden statue to the pioneers who never got their due legends, like Dorothy Dandridge, Lena Horne, and Diane Carroll. She shouted out the peers standing in the trenches with her like Jada Pinkett and Angela Bassett, and dedicated the win to every nameless, faceless woman of colour who finally had a shot because that heavy door had been kicked open. The scale of what she pulled off was absolutely mind-blowing when you look at the stats. We are talking about 74 years of Oscar ceremonies, and she was the first and only black woman to ever take home the lead actress prize. It had been a staggering 62 years since Hattie McDaniel broke the first barrier in the supporting category, which just shows how painfully slow Hollywood is at making real progress. While black actresses had snagged a few wins in the supporting categories, the prestigious leading actress category had remained a strictly whites-only club until that very night. Her role as Letitia Musgrove was intense. She played a grieving woman who gets entangled in a messy, explicit affair with the racist white prison guard, played by Billy Bob Thornton, who actually flipped the switch on her husband. It was a role that demanded Berry strip herself bare, both in the literal sense and in a deeply psychological way that most actresses wouldn't dare touch. She exposed everything, engaging in incredibly intimate scenes and tapping into a level of devastating ugly grief that was uncomfortable to watch. The fact that such a gritty, flawed and scandal-prone character was the vessel for this historic barrier-breaking moment just added to the complexity of the win. For everyone watching at home and in the theatre, Berry's victory felt like the dawn of a new age where actresses of colour would finally get top billing and top prizes. You could feel the desperation and hope in her voice. It wasn't just about winning a trophy, it was about hoping this victory would stop the industry from ignoring women who looked like her. As she sobbed that night, she truly believed that now she had a chance, that opportunities were finally going to flow her way. But here is the tragic twist. It's an overdue moment that shockingly still hasn't been repeated in the same way. Even now, in 2026, she remains the only black woman to win Best Actress. What felt like the crashing of a dam turned out to be a mere leak, highlighting just how bizarrely exceptional the circumstances have to be for the Academy to notice. It seems you have to move mountains just for a black lead actress to get the same recognition that others get for standard dramatic roles. Berry herself has been vocal about her heartbreak, admitting she's crushed that her big win didn't spark the industry-wide transformation she had prayed for. For anyone studying the dark history of Tinseltown, Berry's isolated win is a bittersweet pill. It's a massive milestone, sure, but it also serves as damning evidence of just how much further this town needs to go before it can call itself inclusive. The image of her clutching that gold man, weeping uncontrollably about breaking a 7-decade curse, remains one of the most powerful and haunting visuals in Oscar history. It was a flash of genuine triumph, but looking back, it's stained with the sobering reality that she is still standing there all alone on that pedestal. While Berry's win was a celebration of a living legend, Breaking Barriers, our next entry, takes a tragic turn, honouring a talent we lost far too soon. Before the tragedy, even simple interviews highlighted his charm, with reporters trying to pin down exactly where this mysterious talent from down under originated. He was a Perth boy hailing from Western Australia, a detail that became a footnote in a legacy that ended way too abruptly, bringing us to number 7. We are talking about the heartbreaking posthumous Oscar win for the incomparable Heath Ledger in 2009. When they announced Heath Ledger as the Best Supporting Actor at the 81st Academy Awards on February 22nd, 2009, the silence and emotion in the room created one of the heaviest moments ever televised. It had been just over a year, 13 months to be exact, since the entertainment world was shattered by the loss of Heath Ledger. Gone at only 28 years old, due to an accidental prescription toxicity, he was about to be immortalised for a role that redefined villainy, his chilling, chaotic turn as the Joker in Christopher Nolan's masterpiece, The Dark Knight. The tension in the theatre was palpable as Kevin Kline carefully opened the envelope, took a breath, and read out the name that everyone was hoping to hear, Heath Ledger. Almost instantly, the entire Dolby Theatre erupted. The audience didn't just clap, they rose to their feet in a wave of sorrow and celebration, a standing ovation that honoured a life extinguished too soon, just as much as it praised a performance for the ages. Cameras swept across the crowd, capturing the raw, unguarded expressions of Hollywood's elite. This wasn't the standard polite golf clap you usually see at the Oscars. This was genuine heartbreak mixed with immense respect. In a deeply moving scene, Ledger's family took the stage to accept the golden statue. His parents, Kim and Sally, stood alongside his sister Kate, stepping into the spotlight on behalf of their fallen son. With heavy hearts, they shared that this symbol of cinematic excellence would be held in trust, eventually destined for the hands of Heath's daughter, Matilda, who was only 3 years old at the time. His father spoke to the spirit of his son, saying, "Heath, we both knew that what you created in the Joker was something extraordinarily special. We had even talked about the possibility of being here on this very day." The room held its breath as he continued, "We really wish you were here to hold this yourself, but we proudly accept this award on behalf of your beautiful Matilda." However, the weight of this victory went far beyond the usual tear-jerking nature of a posthumous tribute. It signalled a massive cultural shift in the industry. Ledger's victory marked a definitive turning point in how the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences evaluated commercial blockbusters, specifically those adapted from the pages of comic books. Before The Dark Knight kicked down the door, superhero flicks were largely ignored by the serious categories usually quarantined to technical awards like sound editing or visual effects. But Ledger's transformative work, a psychological deep dive into anarchy and chaos, left the voters with no choice. They were forced to admit that world-class acting could be found in a summer tentpole movie just as easily as in a period drama. For cinema historians and critics, this Oscar stands as a monumental bridge connecting the old Hollywood traditions with the new era of franchise dominance. It was a lightning-in-a-bottle performance, merging the intense method acting style of legends like Marlon Brando or Robert De Niro with a character pulled straight from pop culture mythology. That single win did more to legitimise graphic novel adaptations as vehicles for serious art than decades of film criticism ever could. It fundamentally changed the game, expanding the horizon of what the industry considered worthy of its highest honour. It was a brilliant final act celebrated in a room that felt more like a cathedral than an awards show. The sombre gravity of the moment was a stark departure from the usual glitz, glamour and self-congratulatory vibe of the ceremony. Anyone watching that night would be hard-pressed to forget the bittersweet atmosphere, the collision of celebrating a genius talent while simultaneously mourning the fact that he would never perform again. With this win, Ledger joined an incredibly exclusive and tragic club, becoming only the second actor in history to win a posthumous Oscar following Peter Finch for Network decades earlier. His name was etched onto a short, sorrowful list of artists who received their flowers only after they had left the stage forever. To this day, Ledger's win remains one of those rare instances where an Academy Award transcended mere industry, pat on the back, to become a genuine global moment of collective grief and reverence. It stands as a permanent monument to what the world lost and a testament to the art that remains behind. The performance possesses such undeniable power that acting students will likely be deconstructing his choices and mannerisms for generations to come. From that solemn, dignified tribute to a fallen star, we must now pivot to what is arguably the most chaotic, unscripted disaster in the history of the Academy Awards. We are talking, of course, about the moment the world stopped breathing Will Smith slapping Chris Rock in 2022. It was the 94th Academy Awards on March 27th, 2022 a night that delivered a scene so shocking it instantly became the most notorious clip in Oscar history. Will Smith, the frontrunner for Best Actor, strode onto the stage and delivered a hard slap across the face of presenter Chris Rock after the comedian cracked a joke about Smith's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith. Rock was on stage to present the award for Best Documentary Feature when he ad-libbed, "Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it." The joke was a dig at her shaved head, a style she adopted due to her struggle with alopecia, an autoimmune condition that causes hair loss. Smith initially seemed to chuckle along, but the mood shifted violently. He walked up, struck Rock, returned to his seat, and then screamed twice with terrifying intensity, "Keep my wife's name out your mouth." Because the United States broadcast has a delay, the uncensored audio and video aired first in international markets like Japan and Australia, spreading online like wildfire. Meanwhile, viewers in the US were left confused as the broadcast feed cut the audio, leaving dead air and a silent, heated exchange. Inside the Dolby Theatre, the room fell into a stunned, suffocating silence. The A-list crowd was paralysed, unsure if they were watching a pre-planned comedy bit or a legitimate physical assault. Rock, though visibly rattled, managed to maintain an incredible level of composure. He tried to reset the room, stammering out that was the greatest night in the history of television. But the historical weight of this altercation goes far beyond just being a celebrity tabloid scandal. It represented a total collapse of the carefully curated decorum and elegance that the Academy had spent nearly a century trying to uphold. Even as celebrity culture became more casual over the years, the Oscars had always clung to a veneer of old Hollywood class, a night where everyone was on their best behaviour. In a matter of seconds, Smith's actions shattered that illusion of sophistication on live television in front of millions of viewers. To make the night even more surreal, just minutes after the assault, Smith was announced as the winner of Best Actor for his role in King Richard. He took the stage again, this time in tears, delivering a long acceptance speech where he apologised to the Academy and his fellow nominees, though he conspicuously did not apologise to Rock while trying to rationalise his behaviour. He famously said, "Love will make you do crazy things," and ended with a plea, "I hope the Academy invites me back." The fallout was swift and severe. Smith eventually resigned from the Academy, which then handed down a punishment banning him from attending any Academy events, including the Oscars, for the next 10 years. The slap ignited a firestorm of debate across social media and news outlets, touching on everything from the boundaries of comedy and toxic masculinity to race relations and the defence of black women. The discourse revealed just how deeply divided the culture was, with millions of people arguing over who was the victim and who was the villain. It remains without a doubt the most chaotic, baffling and explosive moment in modern Oscar memory. For the gossip columnists and PR crisis teams dissecting Tinseltown's history, the infamous Smith-Rock showdown represents a jaw-dropping collision between the Academy's desperate desire for prestige and the messy, chaotic reality of unbridled human emotion. Inside an institution that is built entirely on smoke mirrors and careful image curation, this completely unscripted explosion of raw fury exposed the terrifying limits of Hollywood's power to control its own narrative when the cameras are rolling. For the purists and classic film lovers who were raised on the elegance and dignity of the Oscars' golden era, watching a live assault was a bitter pill to swallow. And the incident served as a brutal wake-up call, underscoring just how dramatically our cultural standards for public behaviour had plummeted into the gutter. As the legendary Dick Van Dyke, who was 96 at the time, reportedly scoffed later back in his heyday, gentlemen settled their beefs behind closed doors, not with physical violence on the most dignified stage in America. Whether you view it as a momentary lapse of judgment by a husband pushed too far, or simply an inexcusable act of toxic aggression, that single slap instantly cemented itself as the defining legacy of the 94th Academy Awards, completely eclipsing the winners and ensuring its permanent spot in the Hall of Fame for Oscar infamy. Moving away from that unplanned disaster of physical confrontation, We turn our attention to a meticulously orchestrated bit of chaos that unexpectedly rewrote the rulebook for making Oscar history in the modern digital age. Angie, grab the pizza. Okay, let's keep it moving. Apologies, number 9. The night Ellen's star-studded selfie literally broke Twitter back in 2014 during an Oscar ceremony that was packed with predictable victories and very few genuine shocks. Host Ellen DeGeneres engineered a massive cultural phenomenon when she rounded up a squad of A-list heavy hitters, creating an impromptu photo op during the 86th Academy Awards broadcast on March 2nd, 2014 that would change social media forever. Smack in the middle of the live global broadcast, DeGeneres wandered into the seated audience clutching her smartphone and started recruiting the biggest names in the room for a group snapshot. "I need to get a picture, the ultimate selfie with all of you," she declared initially, zeroing in on the legendary Meryl Streep to anchor the shot. Within a matter of seconds, the huddle expanded as Jennifer Lawrence Channing Tatum, Julia Roberts Bradley Cooper, Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie Lupita Nyong'o, Kevin Spacey and Jared Leto all squeezed into the frame. It was Bradley Cooper, boasting the longest reach of the group, who actually snapped the picture, capturing a candid moment where these untouchable stars crowded together, grinning like excited teenagers at a concert rather than the heavily guarded Hollywood royalty they actually are. "We are going to crash Twitter right now," DeGeneres predicted boldly as she hit send on the image, and her prophecy turned into reality almost instantly. In just a few minutes, the photo had been retweeted more than 1 million times, and shortly after that, Twitter's servers actually buckled and briefly crashed under the sheer volume of traffic. By the time the credits rolled on the ceremony, that single selfie had shattered all previous retweet records, eventually racking up more than 3 million shares across the platform. But what made this moment historically juicy wasn't just the numbers. It symbolised Hollywood's desperate pivot towards social media engagement and pretending to have a direct connection with the plebs at home. In the past, Oscar ceremonies maintained a strict velvet rope distance between the viewers on the couch and the stars in the theatre. We're used to gaze up at them on their Olympian stage, untouchable and distant. DeGeneres' selfie took a sledgehammer to that fourth wall, manufacturing a seemingly spontaneous moment of celebrity accessibility that was perfectly calibrated for the viral hunger of the social media age. For anyone studying the timeline of Oscar stunts, this selfie represented a fascinating evolution in how the ceremony tried to stay relevant amidst a changing media landscape. From the crackling radio broadcasts of the 1930s to the golden age of television in the 1950s, and eventually to the live streams of the 2000s, the Academy Awards has always had to scramble to adapt to new technologies to keep eyeballs on the screen. The selfie moment, which was actually heavily sponsored by Samsung, though plenty of viewers missed that calculated marketing detail, marked the Academy's total surrender to social media as the new king of cultural relevance. It was effectively the night that social media hijacked the Oscars for good. While it looked like light-hearted, chaotic fun, that selfie actually signalled a profound shift in the toxic but codependent relationship between Hollywood and its audience. Suddenly, the most prestigious award ceremony on Earth wasn't just about honouring cinematic excellence anymore. It was about generating bite-sized, shareable content for the timeline. The boundary between an exclusive elite celebration and mass public participation had been cleverly blurred by corporate interests. That record-breaking selfie also exposed the brutal celebrity hierarchies in some very interesting and slightly hilarious ways. Some legends like Liza Minnelli desperately tried to get into the photo but were too short to push through the wall of A-listers, while others managed to strategically centre themselves for maximum exposure. For buffs of Hollywood history, it created a fascinating time capsule showing exactly who was considered top-tier A-list talent back in 2014. Although looking back, the prominent placement of Kevin Spacey has made the image significantly more problematic and cringeworthy in retrospect, given his subsequent scandals. In the grand evolution of shocking Oscar moments, Ellen's selfie stands tall as the first true viral sensation that was deliberately manufactured during the show. It was a harbinger of how social media metrics would increasingly dictate the Academy's approach to its signature event, prioritising clicks over class. While Ellen's selfie made digital history, our next moment represented a long overdue breakthrough that finally cracked Hollywood's stubborn gender barrier. Number 10, Catherine Bigelow becomes the first female Best Director. It was 2010 when Barbra Streisand tore open the envelope at the 82nd Academy Awards and famously exclaimed, "The time has come," before she even announced Catherine Bigelow as the Best Director winner for The Hurt Locker. She was already acknowledging a milestone that was frankly shamefully overdue for the industry. In the entire 82-year history of the Academy, up to that point, absolutely no woman had ever taken home the Best Director trophy, despite the brilliance of filmmakers ranging from Lois Weber and Dorothy Arzner in the silent era to modern icons like Jane Campion and Sofia Coppola. Bigelow's victory was historic, and not just because she shattered the glass ceiling, but because she did it by beating her own ex-husband, James Cameron, adding a delicious layer of personal drama to the professional triumph. Let's talk about shattering glass ceilings with high explosives. Catherine Bigelow didn't just win an award, she blew the doors off the Dolby Theatre with The Hurt Locker. This wasn't some polite period drama. It was a sweaty, adrenaline-fueled deep dive into a bomb disposal unit in Iraq that completely flipped the script on what a female director's movie is supposed to look like. This wasn't her first rodeo either. The woman had already cemented her status as an absolute action junkie, helming cult classics like the surf heist thriller Point Break and the gritty tech noir Strange Days. She wasn't making rom-coms, she was playing in the boys' sandbox and kicking sand in their faces, dominating aggressive genres that Hollywood usually reserved for the guys. But the real juice of the night, the gossip columns were on fire because Bigelow was going head-to-head with none other than her ex-husband, James Cameron. And he wasn't just bringing any movie, he had the blue alien juggernaut Avatar, which was literally the biggest cash cow in cinema history. It was the ultimate Hollywood showdown, a gritty, independently financed war flick made on a shoestring budget versus a studio leviathan with unlimited resources. A true David and Goliath story, but with way more red carpet tension. You couldn't script drama like this if you tried. The history books were being written, but the tabloid angle regarding the Battle of the Exes made the victory taste even sweeter. When she finally took the stage to accept the gold, everyone expected a feminist manifesto. Instead, Bigelow pulled a total power move. She sidestepped the woman director label entirely and notably refused to make her gender the headline. She flipped the narrative, dedicating her moment of glory to the men and women in uniform, risking it all in the dust of Iraq, Afghanistan, and conflict zones across the globe. That moment was vintage Bigelow and said everything you needed to know about her career trajectory. It was her way of telling the industry, I'm not a female director, I'm a filmmaker, period. She refused to be put in a box or defined by her gender, demanding respect for the craft alone. For the Tinseltown historians, this victory was a double-edged sword. Sure, it was progress, but let's be real, it was also embarrassing. It highlighted just how painfully slow the industry moves when it comes to equality. Women have been yelling action since the silent era. Yet the bigwigs kept locking them out of the boardrooms, systematically denying them chances to helm the massive budget productions. The fact that it took the Academy 82 long years to finally hand this trophy to a woman speaks volumes about the boys' club mentality deeply retrenched in Hollywood's DNA. In an industry that functioned like a frat house for nearly a century, she didn't just knock on the door, she brought the demolition charges. Bigelow's triumph wasn't just about identity politics, it was about excellence. She delivered a film that critics worshipped and audiences actually paid to see all without selling out her artistic soul. She proved you could have your cake and blow it up too. To add insult to injury for the competition, The Hurt Locker also snatched the Best Picture statuette that night, locking in its legacy as an all-time cinematic great. But was it a floodgate moment? Hardly. The impact is still up for debate. In the years since that night, the stats are still depressing, with only 2 other women climbing that mountain. We saw Chloe Zhao take it for Nomadland in 2021 and Jane Campion for The Power of the Dog in 2022. That's a pretty short list. It begs the question, was Bigelow the start of a revolution or just the token exception that Hollywood uses to pretend everything is fine? The jury is still out on that one. Moving from a moment of dignity to one of absolute insanity, let's rewind to the wildest unscripted disaster in Oscar history. This involves a man who is definitely going to be remembered, though perhaps not for his acting skills. We are talking about the legendary streaker incident that blindsided David Niven in 1974. The year was 1974, the 46th Academy Awards. The vibe was tense, but nobody expected full frontal nudity on prime time. It delivered one of the most jaw-dropping moments in TV history, when a naked man sprinted across the stage behind the host. The culprit was Robert Opel, a photographer and gallery owner with a flair for the dramatic who had scammed his way backstage by posing as a legitimate journalist. Just as the posh David Niven was queuing up an intro for Elizabeth Taylor, Opel dashed behind him, rocking absolutely nothing but a moustache and throwing up a peace sign to the cameras. The star-studded crowd collectively lost their minds, gasping in horror. But Niven, the man was ice cold. Representing the peak of old school class, he didn't even flinch. With the kind of comedic timing you can't teach, he leaned into the mic and dropped the sickest burn in Oscar history. Isn't it fascinating to think that probably the only laugh that man will ever get in his life is by stripping off and showing his shortcomings? Boom! Roasted! The room exploded in laughter and applause, celebrating Niven's ability to turn a disaster into a highlight reel. You have to understand, the Oscars were usually a snooze fest of stiff tuxedos and polite clapping. This naked dash was a culture clash of epic proportions, Hollywood's elite propriety crashing headfirst into the chaotic rebellion of the 1970s counterculture. This wasn't just a prank. The historical significance goes way beyond the shock value of seeing a naked guy on stage. It happened right in the middle of a massive nervous breakdown for American culture. The Vietnam War was coming to a messy end, the Watergate scandal was exploding, and the country was on edge. Social norms regarding nudity and public decency were loosening up fast, and the cracks were showing in the establishment. Opal's streak was the counterculture flipping the bird to the elite right there on the most conservative stage in the world, mirroring the changing attitudes of the era. For the Oscar obsessives, the moment is legendary because of the stark contrast. Opal's radical chaos versus Niven's stiff upper lip composure. Niven, the quintessential British gentleman, stood as the symbol of the Hollywood establishment and order. His perfect ad-lib, which conspiracy theorists still argue might have been scripted, though it's never been proven, showed the kind of quick-witted polish that simply doesn't exist in modern entertainment. If they gave awards for saving the show from total embarrassment, Niven would have walked away with the gold that night. We're still talking about this over 50 years later, not really because of the streaker himself, but because Niven handled it like an absolute boss. It was the perfect visual metaphor for the 70s, the old guard winking at the anarchy, knocking at the door. It was a collision of worlds, Opal's provocation meeting Niven's establishment wit head on. But every Hollywood story has a dark side. Robert Opal's life ended in tragedy. Just 5 years later, in 1979, he was brutally murdered during a robbery at his San Francisco gallery. His 15 minutes of Oscar infamy gave him a taste of celebrity, but his violent death barely made a ripple in the news compared to his naked sprint across the stage. For a moment designed to be a funny, shocking provocation, the story ends with an unexpectedly grim and sombre reality check. From an unauthorised scandal that wasn't on the run sheet to a director who absolutely dominated the box office, let's pivot to the king of the world. The Oscar goes to James Cameron for the Titanic phenomenon. Number 12. Titanic absolutely crushes the all-time win record back in 1998. By the time the 70th Academy Awards rolled around on March 23rd, 1998, the movie wasn't just a hit, it was a full-blown global obsession. James Cameron's massive romantic disaster epic had already obliterated every box office record standing in its way, securing its place in history as the very first motion picture to rake in over $1 billion across the globe. You couldn't go anywhere without hearing Celine Dion's power ballad, My Heart Will Go On, blasting from every speaker. Meanwhile, Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet had transformed from actors into worldwide superstars overnight. Going into the night, nobody was asking if Titanic was going to win. The only real suspense was just how many statues they would haul home. The final count turned out to be legendary. The film snatched up 11 Academy Awards out of 14 nominations, effectively tying the seemingly unbeatable record set by Ben-Hur way back in 1960 for the most wins by a single movie. This incredible feat wouldn't be matched again until The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King swept the board in 2004. Titanic basically owned every major category it touched, grabbing Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Song, and completely wiping the floor with the competition in the technical awards. As the ceremony dragged on and Titanic kept piling up the gold, the whole evening started to feel less like a competition and more like a coronation, with an air of absolute inevitability settling over the room. Producer John Landau and director James Cameron were getting their cardio in with multiple trips to the stage, but it was Cameron who delivered the night's most controversial moment when he screamed, "I'm the king of the world." He was quoting his own movie during his Best Director acceptance speech, but in the context of real life, that line didn't land quite as well as he hoped. To a lot of people in the audience and watching at home, it came off as incredibly arrogant and self-serving rather than a moment of humble triumph. But the historical weight of Titanic's Oscar domination is about way more than just the numbers on a scoreboard. It represented a super rare moment where massive commercial cash flow perfectly aligned with highbrow critical praise. It was that unicorn of a film that managed to shatter financial records while still ticking all the artistic boxes for the Academy voters. Throughout the history of the Oscars, there has always been this snobbish tension between popular blockbusters that make money and the prestigious films that win awards. For one brief shining moment, Titanic managed to build a bridge across that massive divide. For film historians looking back, Titanic's clean sweep also signalled the final breath of a specific type of old-school Hollywood filmmaking. We're talking about a massively expensive original story relying on practical sets and physical effects blended with early CGI, all designed to appeal to every single demographic on the planet. The industry was right on the edge of shifting toward a future obsessed with endless franchises and sequels, making Titanic's success as a standalone story look even more miraculous in hindsight. It was a box office monster that managed to charm the pants off the Academy too. Even though some critics and industry insiders threw shade at the script's occasionally cheesy dialogue and simple plot, the mix of groundbreaking tech, emotional gut punches, and cultural dominance was just too much for voters to ignore. Titanic solidified itself as that rare cinematic beast that defined its era not just by selling tickets at the theatre, but by conquering the industry's most exclusive and prestigious awards night. That domination also crowned James Cameron as one of Hollywood's most powerful directors, giving him the blank check creative capital to spend years developing wildly ambitious projects like Avatar. The Titanic Oscar sweep remains one of the most comprehensive stamps of approval the Academy has ever given to one single movie, proving that every once in a blue moon, what the public loves and what the critics respect can actually be the exact same thing. Moving on from a moment defined by the sheer quantity of awards, we shift gears to a moment defined by the overwhelming quality of the emotional reaction it provoked from Hollywood's elite. Number 13, the legendary Charlie Chaplin receives a heart-stopping 12-minute standing ovation in 1972. When Charlie Chaplin finally set foot back in the United States in 1972 after being gone for 20 years, it was a homecoming heavy with historical baggage and raw emotion. This British-born genius, who had practically built American cinema from the ground up, had been forced out of the country in 1952 under a dark cloud of political paranoia. His visa had been revoked during the height of the McCarthy-era witch hunts because of accusations regarding communist sympathies, effectively exiling him from the industry he helped create. Now returning at the fragile age of 82 to accept an honorary Oscar at the 44th Academy Awards, the tension was palpable. As Chaplin was announced and stepped into the light, the crowd at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion didn't just clap. They rose to their feet in what would turn into the longest standing ovation in the history of the Oscars. The applause thundered on for a full 12 minutes. The cameras zoomed in to catch a clearly shaken and emotional Chaplin. He looked completely overwhelmed by the love coming from the room, raising his hands in his classic gesture of thanks. When the cheering finally died down enough for him to get a word in, his response was simple but incredibly heavy. He told the crowd, "This is an emotional moment for me and words seem so futile, so feeble." He continued, "Thank you for the honour of inviting me here. And oh, you're wonderful, sweet people. Thank you." You cannot overstate how heavy this moment was for Hollywood history. Chaplin wasn't just some old director getting a participation trophy. He was arguably the most influential single artist in the first 50 years of motion pictures. From inventing the little tramp character to pioneering the roles of actor, director, writer, producer and composer all at once, Chaplin had legitimised film as art when Hollywood was just a dust bowl. His honorary Oscar, which was officially given for the incalculable effect he has had in making motion pictures the art form of this century, was about way more than just talent. It was a massive public apology letter from the industry to one of its founding fathers. It served as an implicit acknowledgement of the terrible injustice and political persecution Chaplin faced during the Red Scare. We are talking about the infamous Red Scare era, a time of absolute paranoia that forced one of America's biggest icons to flee the country and live in exile across the Atlantic. For the people who study Tinseltown history, this specific Oscar night was the moment Hollywood finally stopped pretending and admitted they were complicit in the witch hunts of the blacklist era. The irony is thick, because a lot of the people standing up and clapping for Chaplin that night were the exact same folks who stayed quiet 20 years prior when he was being kicked out of the business. Letting him have this triumphant comeback was basically the Hollywood elite trying to buy a little redemption for their spineless behaviour in the past. It was an incredibly heavy scene with tears flowing, thunderous applause and a narrative arc that brought his relationship with the industry full circle. When the crowd stood up for Chaplin, it wasn't just about how funny his movies were, though. The man was a genius. It was about trying to stitch up a massive self-inflicted wound in cinema history. You could feel the weight of the moment in how long and intense that applause was. It was screaming with complicated feelings. It was a mix of awe for his talent, deep guilt for how they treated him, joy that he came back, and the sad realisation that he was getting very old. The comeback didn't stop there. Just 2 years after grabbing that honorary Oscar, the man was officially knighted by Queen Elizabeth II herself. He eventually passed away in 1977 at the ripe old age of 88, sticking around just long enough to see America fall back in love with him completely. That Oscar appearance is still looked at as one of the biggest tearjerkers and emotionally heavy moments in the entire history of the Academy. It was one of those rare times when the awards show stopped being about industry politics and turned into a moment of national apology and healing. Shifting gears from a tearful tribute to a classic legend, let's look at a modern earthquake in representation that shook up the status quo. Coming in at number 14, Women Over 50 absolutely crushed it in 2023. The 95th Academy Awards finally flipped the script on Hollywood's obsession with youth. We witnessed a total celebration of veteran female talent, shattering the old rule that an actress's career is supposed to die the second she hits 40. The ceremony in 2023 was basically a love letter to seasoned queens, highlighting women in their 50s, 60s and even beyond. The absolute peak of the night was watching Michelle Yeoh, at 60 years young, snatch the Best Actress trophy for Everything Everywhere All at Once, making history as the first Asian woman to ever do it. She didn't shy away from the topic either. In her acceptance speech, Yeoh called out the industry's ageism right to their faces. She looked into the lens and dropped a line for the history books. Ladies, do not let anybody tell you that you are ever past your prime. It was the ultimate message of never surrender. And to make it even sweeter, Jamie Lee Curtis, at 64, took home Best Supporting Actress for the exact same movie. Curtis, who has been grinding in this business for 5 solid decades, used her speech to honour the long, wild ride she has been on. She shouted out the horror fans and the people who supported her genre films, screaming to hundreds of thousands of fans that we just won an Oscar together. The night also featured the legendary Angela Bassett, looking absolutely regal at 64 nominated for her powerful role in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. This was a massive return to the Oscar conversation for her, coming 29 years after she was nominated for crushing it as Tina Turner. Even though she didn't walk away with the gold statue, her presence in the category was another huge win for mature actresses getting the respect they deserve. This whole situation was historically massive because it challenged one of the nastiest and most persistent biases in the entertainment world. For way too long, talented actresses watched their opportunities dry up and vanish the moment they got a few wrinkles. While the old men in Hollywood kept getting action hero roles into their 70s, the 2023 show hinted that this double standard might finally be crumbling. Industry experts are looking at this as a perfect storm, where several massive changes in the business are finally colliding. You have the ripple effects of the Me Too movement demanding value for women plus international markets that have totally different views on beauty and age. Yo's victory proved that older audiences have serious economic power, and they want to see themselves reflected on screen, not just teenagers. These women didn't just survive the aging process, they kicked the door down and took over. But here is the real tea on why this specific Oscar night was one for the history books. We weren't just watching these legendary women accept a polite pat on the back for a lifetime of service, or seeing them relegated to playing someone's dusty grandmother in the background. Absolutely not. These fierce queens were finally being worshipped for carrying entire films on their backs, delivering messy, complicated and dynamic leading performances that completely shattered every single ageist stereotype in the book. Just look at the incomparable Michelle Yeoh. Her role didn't just ask for a few tears, it demanded high-octane martial arts action, combined with gut-wrenching emotional trauma, effectively taking a sledgehammer to the myth that actresses over a certain age can't still kick serious butt. Now, the million-dollar question on everyone's mind is whether Tinseltown has actually turned a new leaf for good, or if this was just a lucky one-time anomaly that we will look back on with nostalgia. Let's be real, Hollywood's closet is full of skeletons when it comes to diversity, with a long, embarrassing history of teasing progress only to slam the door shut again the very next year. However, the fact that these movies didn't just win gold statues, but also made serious bank at the box office, suggests a new reality that even the stuffy studio executives can't ignore. Inclusion actually sells tickets. It proves that ticket buyers are desperate to see female stars dominating the screen at 40, 50, 60 and beyond, rather than discarding them the moment they leave their 20s. Let's pivot from that recent milestone and rewind the clock to a legendary throwback that completely redefined what cinema could be. Number 15, The Godfather takes home the big prize for Best Picture way back in 1973. When the Corleone family saga snatched the Best Picture trophy at the 45th Academy Awards on March 27, 1973. It wasn't just a win for a great movie, it was a cultural earthquake. It marked the moment the Academy finally woke up and embraced the gritty new Hollywood, signalling a shift toward moral ambiguity, fresh visual styles, and a generation of young directors who refused to play by the old rules. Francis Ford Coppola's mob masterpiece was already a massive pop culture explosion by the time it hit theatres in 1972, becoming an instant sensation. People were lining up around the block, smashing box office records left and right, while critics were absolutely drooling over its brilliance. However, securing that golden statue was far from a done deal, and the tension in the room was palpable. You have to understand that the Academy was still a very old-fashioned club. They were used to polished musicals and feel-good stories, not the gritty, blood-soaked reality of mob life where the bad guys didn't always pay for their sins. This movie was a slap in the face to traditional Tinseltown glamour. So, when producer Albert S. Ruddy finally walked up to the podium to claim the Best Picture honour, he famously kept his mouth shut for the most part, offering only the briefest of words. It was as if he knew that the film's seismic impact on pop culture was screaming loud enough to drown out any generic acceptance speech he could muster. The night got even more chaotic with the Best Actor win for Marlon Brando. In one of the biggest scandals in Oscar history, he ghosted the ceremony and sent an activist to reject the award on his behalf. At least Coppola and Mario Puzo were there to accept their screenplay trophies without causing a scene. But looking back, the real headline of The Godfather's victory isn't the drama. It's how it essentially forced the Academy to legitimise the new Hollywood revolution that was tearing down the studio system. For years, the big studios had been losing money and losing touch, completely failing to connect with the counterculture youth of the late 60s and early 70s. Suddenly, you had this wild new breed of directors, guys like Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese and Robert Altman, who were rewriting the rulebook. They weren't making safe cookie-cutter flicks. They were crafting deeply personal, raw and challenging art, heavily inspired by edgy European cinema and the harsh realities of American life that the elites tried to ignore. For anyone studying the history of fame and film, The Godfather taking the top prize was the moment the Academy finally blinked. This organisation, known for being incredibly conservative and safe, had to bow down and admit that the art form was evolving and they could either get on board or get left behind in the dust. It was the perfect storm, a movie that made a boatload of cash but was also a masterpiece of art. It served as the ultimate bridge connecting the golden age of the past with the gritty future of cinema. The Corleone family business didn't just make money, it became absolute cinematic royalty, setting a standard that everyone else would chase for decades. But beyond the immediate shockwaves, this victory created the blueprint for what we now call the modern prestige film. It proved that a movie could be visually dark, morally complex, and completely obsessed with character psychology, all while refusing to hold the audience's hand or give them a happy ending. You can draw a straight line from this moment to dozens of future winners. Without the Corleones, you probably don't get The Silence of the Lambs or No Country for Old Men getting that kind of recognition. The win was also a massive power shift for directors in their constant wars against studio executives. It proved that if you let a visionary artist do their thing without interference, you could win awards and break box office records. Remember the suits at Paramount fought Coppola on almost everything. They hated his ideas. They didn't want Brando because he was toxic and they hated the dark, moody lighting. Winning Best Picture was the ultimate I told you so to the executives who tried to ruin the movie. That night in Los Angeles marked the turning point where the Academy stopped pretending the world wasn't changing and embraced a modern, complicated and dangerous version of storytelling. It was the birth of a more influential era of American cinema, one that would dominate the global conversation for the next 50 years. But the Oscars are more than just industry awards, they are major cultural milestones. When you look at these 15 historic moments together, you start to see a pattern that goes way beyond who wore what or who gave the best speech. The Academy Awards have always acted as a sort of cultural barometer. Sometimes they are ahead of the curve, but usually they are dragging their feet reluctantly, following the shifts in America's social consciousness. They reflect the mood of the nation, often highlighting our biggest divides and our slow, painful march toward progress. Just look at the timeline from Hattie McDaniel tragically accepting her award in a hotel that wouldn't even let her sit with her co-stars to Parasite, shattering the language barrier nearly 80 years later. These flashpoints map out the excruciatingly slow expansion of who is allowed to be celebrated and recognised as great in American culture. But the Oscars haven't just been a passive mirror documenting these changes. The stage itself has been an active battlefield. It is a glitzy arena where serious questions about representation, artistic merit, and whose stories matter are fought out in front of millions of viewers worldwide. What makes these 15 specific moments so legendary isn't just that they changed film history. It's that they forced the entire world to have uncomfortable conversations. Sidney Poitier didn't just win an award, he won it right in the heat of the civil rights movement, making a statement that could not be ignored. Brando's refusal wasn't just an ego trip, it forced a conversation about the erasure of Native Americans. Catherine Bigelow winning wasn't just about a movie, it was a spotlight on gender equity in a male-dominated workplace. These weren't just industry parties, these were moments where Hollywood and mainstream America collided. It was a public dialogue played out in tuxedos and gowns about who we are as a society and, more importantly, who we pretend to be. Because the Oscars sit right at the intersection of massive entertainment spectacle and serious cultural institution, these shocks to the system hit harder. Think about Halle Berry sobbing on stage as she realised the weight of history on her shoulders. Or when Bong Joon-ho paid tribute to Martin Scorsese, bridging the gap between East and West. Or the infamous moment Sachin Littlefeather stood there taking boos from the crowd just to speak her truth. These aren't just clips for a highlight reel, they are burned into our collective cultural memory as defining images of their eras. They are touchstones that became bigger than the movies themselves, weaving into the larger messy narrative of American history. Thank you for giving me this chance, for believing that I could do it. And now tonight I have this. That emotion is real, but it also highlights the Academy's complicated legacy. These 15 historic beats expose a very complex and honestly sometimes hypocritical relationship with progress. The organisation has played both the villain and the hero, acting as the elite gatekeeper, protecting traditional white values, while also occasionally serving as the platform for radical change. You can't ignore the math. The decades-long gaps are embarrassing: 24 years between McDaniel and Poitier. Then another 38 years from Poitier to Berry, and it took a staggering 82 years before a female director finally took home the big prize. That screams institutional resistance. And yet, despite the gatekeeping, the Academy provided the very stage where these barriers were publicly smashed. By giving these moments visibility, they made transformation possible, even if they were dragged into it, kicking and screaming. In the last few years, especially after the humiliation of the Oscars So White scandal went viral. The Academy has been scrambling to fix its image, making a frantic effort to diversify its voting body and finally broaden its perspective before they become irrelevant. When you look at the big picture, from Parasite making history to women directors finally getting their due, and now icons over 50 taking centre stage, it looks like the Academy is trying to crawl out of its cave and expand its vision. If there is one thing we can take away from these 15 wild, controversial and groundbreaking moments, it is that we are still obsessed with the Oscars specifically because they are such a glorious, chaotic mess of imperfections and contradictions. They represent the perfect clash of art versus commerce, Hollywood trying to be highbrow and artistic while desperately needing to sell popcorn, balancing progressive hype with stubborn tradition. That tension is exactly why we tune in. It stops being just a boring award ceremony and turns into something much juicier, becoming a massive cultural battlefield where our biggest arguments about representation are and who actually gets to tell their stories happen. Broadcasting those shifting values and heated debates for the entire world to judge on a global stage.